Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Three Body Problem, a podcast that has never won an award. However, we've made it all the way to episode 18, checking in from Romania. Costin Raju, how are you, my friend?
Hello. I'm in the beautiful countryside of Transylvania, not far from Dracula's castle.
Are you fucking serious right now?
I am. Come and
You're in a
visit
hotel
me.
room on vacation again?
I'm working. I don't know. Can I say I'm working?
Pull that microphone a little closer. It sounds like you're in the distance. Juanito, checking in from Washington, D.C. Mr. America, how are you?
Mr. America. Good, man. Good. Just, I have no idea. I'm doing well, man. I'm just happy to be here.
All right. I got a flight to catch immediately after this podcast. We're going to try and make it not too rushed. But
this is making me feel like we're on the clock, man. Like, this is like, for once, this, feels like a lot of pressure to not delay you.
We're on the clock a little bit. I want to start with two small items quickly. And Juan, I'll go to you first. The White House issued some guidance this week on TLP, Traffic Light Protocol. And the idea is that they're releasing TLP guidance for federal agencies to clarify their intent. Why, who's upset about something? Why are we reading this press release? What's the importance of this?
I think it's actually pretty cool that they released it. But I can see how for most people this doesn't make a whole lot of sense. So just as valuable context, the issue this is looking to address is almost entirely government facing, in the sense of there's nothing, as far as a lot of federal agencies are concerned, particularly the FBI, there's nothing about TLP that is binding, or even in many cases, even considered meriting basic respect, because it's not an NDA, it's not a legal requirement. So when somebody says, "Hey, I'm sharing this with you under TLP Amber Strict or TLP Red," there was this sense of, kind of like we're playing a game with each other, like, haha, yeah, sure, but there was no imperative that they should respect that. And in some cases, we saw that echoed by some parts of the private sector in kind of uncomfortable ways. Like there was a talk at Blue Hat Seattle, Microsoft talk. I want to say it was like maybe 4 years ago or so, where these Microsoft lawyers basically said, "Hey, TLP is not the law. TLP is not binding. TLP is not real," and it went over like a freaking lead balloon, but in many ways it was an expression of that same government mentality. So to see the ONCD come out and tell the rest of Gov, "Hey, you need to respect researchers and information sharing culture, and that means you need to respect this TLP protocol," it's actually a really great move, just of USG trying to sort its own house out.
When you say respect it, what do you mean? Like there's disrespect to it? People are not sharing and not, help me understand, Costin, what's the problem statement we're trying to address here?
I wanted to ask the same question. I don't know why you're directing it at me, because we have our expert here in the American side of the house.
Why am I Mr. America now?
But immediately, when I was reading this, the thing that came into my mind was, all right, so they had to publish this. It means that somebody was not respecting it. The question is, who was not respecting, and can we have some examples? And if we can get some examples, can we, I don't know,
no, I'm asking a question to you, Costin, because I imagine you've had cases where you've shared stuff with government folks, not here in the US only, but all around the world, or vendors on the TLP. Have you had problems in the past? And where is the problem? When you say someone is not respecting it, are they sharing beyond what they're supposed to share? Are they not giving back? What's the problem? What's the friction point?
I think there is a kind of, and I see where your question is going. There is a deflation of TLP levels, in the sense that I've seen many times when information is shared under TLP Red, the other party kind of understands it's TLP Amber plus strict. When they do it TLP Amber, they think it's maybe green. I don't know. So there's this deflation, which is why in the past we came up with something better than TLP Red, which is TLP Black. So whenever something was TLP Black, and that in the past we had TLP Black stuff to share that was way above TLP Red, and it was immediately understood that that is the true red. I mean, black. The true black is black. That's it.
Well, the idea being like, hey, if you share this, like someone is going to get
finished.
Fired, someone is going to get killed. Like you're actually like you should actually take this seriously. And look,
but that's like the last time that you see any kind of information from our side. Like if you do some mistakes, oh, sorry, I'm colorblind, so I thought red is green and the other thing around. Oh yeah, we understand. But with black is black. You can't say you're colorblind.
Well, I think TMPL, even the existence of TLP Amber strict is such a ridiculous, self-defeating thing, right? Like TLP Amber is supposed to be keep it in your freaking org, use it for your own purposes internally, and to then have to be like, no, but we meant that strictly. Like, don't share it to other organizations. You're like, yeah, that was kind of the whole point. So I like the idea of thinking of it as sort of like, I guess, inflationary? Like
deflation, inflation.
But look, the larger issue here is there's a difference between somebody doesn't know how to respect TLP Amber Strict, TLP Red, and someone doesn't think that there's anything to respect. And in that sense, USG is... without pointing any fingers, it's basically
a bad actor?
Sorry?
Are they a bad actor in this space generally? That's the reason for this memo?
I think that there are portions of the U.S. government that are set in their ways and don't necessarily have a culture of respecting, the terms under which a source provides something. And look, I think nobody is saying FBI, but you have this thing with the FBI where you just, they've never been good at source management. They don't actually have a culture for it, precisely because in many ways, like if you're dealing with the FBI, you're probably under the terms of, let's say, a confidential informant, which is not an accurate dynamic for working with domain experts, right? Yeah. Like, I think all other IC organizations can they have some equivalent mechanism by which they know how they would talk to somebody that's just a domain expert versus somebody that in theory, like you have some form of leverage over. And that's what makes it so hard to just be a researcher who wants to do the right thing with the FBI when they look at you the same way they would look at like some, drug offender that they're holding on a leash because they have them under some kind of leverage. It's like those two things are not the same.
Someone's phone on the desk is buzzing and it will drive Gabe crazy. Whoever it is, throw it on the floor for me.
I'm not going to say Kostin, but I'm going to say Kostin. Mine's on
your cell phone on the desk.
No, sir.
Something is buzzing. Quickly, TLP is basically the best we got around like rules around information sharing. It's quite clear that there's like this deflationary, there's this strict, there's like some lack of clarity to it. What needs fixing? If I put a magic wand in your hand and says fix this TLP thing, what would you do?
I don't know how much the standard itself needs fixing. That implies that there's something that's not being understood in the mechanism. The traffic light protocol is about as good or as flawed as any other standard is going to get when you have to accept that the enforcement of it is based on trust, right? And part of it is the continuity of reputation is what has allowed us to maintain TLP for the many, many years that we have, in the sense of when somebody comes around and does something dumb with data that wasn't their own, you can't put that toothpaste back in the tube, but you can say, hey, no one is going to share with this organization. Or you just tell your friends, right? I refuse to share with so-and-so researcher because he's burned me in the past. And that kind of thing in such a small community is actually really important. It really can be very limiting. There's people that have gotten ejected from trust groups and ejected from certain situations where you're
rare though. It stands up to scrutiny because it's pretty rare that you'll get like some sort of TLP breach, major TLP breach. Or am I misreading it?
No, I think that people don't make a big... It's not that they don't make a big deal of it. They don't make a public deal of it, right? If you weren't supposed to share something or something was shared delicately, chances are you're also not in a position to go out in public on Twitter and say, hey, so-and-so fucked me. They shared this information I wasn't even supposed to have or that I couldn't publicly attribute. So it becomes more of a reputational thing. I think where you have problems is Again, I'm going to point at the FBI, but not because of the org in particular, but because of the dynamics. Because in the FBI, you're often dealing with case agents that are sort of like regionally bounded. It's a jurisdictional thing. It's not a specialty thing. There is this perception that there is no continuity there, right? Like if you were dealing with a case agent from Cincinnati because they're the ones that own the Mirai case, and you get screwed by that person, the next time when you're dealing with North Korea cryptocurrency heist, you might be dealing with someone out of Pittsburgh that has nothing to do with the person you were talking to before. So the incentives are a little bit misaligned in that the Mirai person could have screwed you over, gotten a promotion, and moved on, and you may never deal with them again. And then you get some random other person from Pittsburgh, and they're like, well, but I didn't do that to you. You go, yeah, but your organization is such that we won't talk to you anymore. So like there's some misalignments in those perceptions, but I think ONCD is doing the right thing in starting that conversation within the government, saying, hey guys, like, if you want to play in this game, you need people to share info with you. If you want people to share info with you, you can't go screw them over and pretend that their originator controlled guidance doesn't count because it's not what you're used to. You need to pay attention to this thing. So
Costin, is this a hiccup in the rest of the world beyond the US, or should British government, French government, German government be issuing memos telling their folks to respect TLP? Is this a disconnect with?
I think that I think it's important to the overall context, which is that sometimes information is overclassified, and it's overclassified in the sense of top secret classification or secret and so on. But it also sometimes it's overclassified in the sense of the TLP level. So what is TLP red? Actually, it could be TLP amber +3. So. I think that this is one of the points which is not being discussed too much, and it's not being addressed by any of these things. And also the fact that the traffic light protocol in general and this sharing is also kind of, maybe one direction, especially when you talk to the government, right? It's typically one sharing with the FBI and not getting anything back in exchange, like most of the times. It's a joke. But I think if we look at the TLP as a whole, right, it has maybe, let's say, two missing dimensions. One is the direction, so it's like mostly one way, but as it talk about what you get back in exchange, that's one thing. And I guess the other point here is the fact that there's typically overclassification. Some people just take it to themselves to change that classification. And I think that maybe with other governments not being as big and bureaucratic, maybe they pay more attention to this classification. There's less overclassification, and perhaps that's why we haven't seen such directives before from other governments. But at the same time, it could be that the U.S. government is way ahead of everyone else, and it's actually a very good thing. Setting the example.
We already did 10 minutes on TLP. I'm not going beyond 10 minutes.
And we haven't even talked about TLP Brown.
I was just going to say, like, the U.S. government is not ahead of anybody else. I think it just reflects this kind of like more of a drone mentality that you get with a lot of the people who work in certain parts of USG who don't usually deal with human sources. They don't usually represent themselves as individuals. So you actually need the whole machinery to come down and say, hey guys, don't be shitty, be trustworthy. Like it's important for an ecosystem. That's all this is.
And we just spent 14 minutes on it. Quickly before we get into the news, Reuters republished their piece on Appin, this Indian startup that did this core research with your team at Sentinel One. Juan republished it after getting a favorable court ruling around freedom of the press, freedom of speech. I read the paper. Pretty significant, because it was very rare that stories are pulled. Stories on this kind of cyber investigations are pulled completely. Reuters pulled their story, Sentinel One pulled its research, and a lot of news publications got lawyer letters to pull, and most of them pulled the research. Quick question for you, Juan. I don't want to belabor it too much.
I don't know is this podcast going to get pulled as well after this?
We'll find out. We don't fact check.
This is
quickly, are you guys going to republish your report? What's going on in your team?
I don't want to get ahead of ourselves. We have, I'll say this, no bullshit. We actually have a really great legal team who have done anything and everything to try to enable us in most cases. They've been really wonderful. So I don't want to get ahead of them. They're reviewing the situation now. Our hope is to put the blog back up, but we will listen to our beloved lawyers in this one.
Costin, where is Appin now? Like post-report, the company still exists? Is it business as usual? What has happened since this legal drama?
Well, typically, I think what happens with this company. So again, not speaking here in particular because I don't want our podcast to be taken offline, but in general speaking, like they just rebrand, they rename the company, maybe fire some people leave, they start another company like as a branch. This happens like all the time, and they continue operations sometimes with different people with a different name. So that I think happens a lot, and it's quite typical in this field. Now, I see here that there's discussions that the company is still active, but essentially as other companies, no longer called Appin.
Something to keep in mind with this is, so we keep talking about Appin as a company. What ends up happening with them is, look, to their credit, to their credit, in infamy, Appin starts something really big within India, and it extends far beyond Appin itself as a singular company. There's a reason why kind of part of what they were alleging and what they used to try to take down the Reuters story is this notion of like defamation to these this association of Appin training centers. The idea being that you're disparaging people that have been trained up within these security training centers as if they're all people doing illegal, nefarious activities, hack for hire, stuff like that, which I don't think that was alleged in the first place, but sure, let's add that clarification in there. But more importantly, it shows you where Appin has gone as a sort of like business phenomenon, that you have this almost franchise model of Appin training centers that have created these other organizations that have presumably produced all kinds of good and bad things. What's interesting there really is when you look at the APT, like the threat actor side of the house, without correlating them with any company in particular, there is a similar structure to how you see Indian threat actors kind of develop and piece apart and branch out, where for many of these actors, you end up finding some tie to Operation Hangover back in the day, to something that there's this kind of like tree trunk that splits, and you don't have any perfect segmentation between it, but like Modified Elephant had early connections to Operation Hangover stuff. Sidewinders had early connections to Operation, like you have all these different pockets of individual threat actors now, but in some way they all seem to go back to this like trunk. So it is a very interesting situation. I won't correlate that with whatever new Appin derivative orgs there are out there, but it is an interesting, similarity.
And Appin is one of many of these private mercenary firms that we've talked about popping up here and there. We talked about the Apple lawsuit, the NSO group issue. Like Appin is just one of those small things. This one became relevant because why? It was in India. It was a startup that had come out of this training center. Like why?
No, there's a couple of interesting aspects to this that make it very relevant. One of them being that you mentioned NSO and whatnot. This situation is very different than NSO. NSO is providing tooling, and you can have conversations about whether that's legitimate or not, but they're being given to organizations presumably within the government that are doing things presumably within some legal framework. What happens with hacker for hire companies in India, writ large, is this kind of complete lawlessness, where they are getting hired by just about anybody. They were getting hired by private investigators, by people involved in lawsuits across the world. So what ends up happening with this Reuters story is some information makes it out of Appin that actually shows the inner workings of how Appin was allegedly supporting these different types of customers. And if you read the Reuters story, you get some really interesting stuff where there's legal proceedings in the US, things that have, nothing to do with cyber, that are being, the legal process is being undermined by these hacker for hire entities that are just, providing blackmail information, providing all kinds of things that can then be leveraged in these situations. So you're talking about a very different dynamic, right? Hacker for hire being like, you're literally just going online, paying some random person who's willing to break the law for you, then taking that information, doing whatever the hell you want with it. So it's a much more cutthroat, much more concerning dynamic with a far wider global pool of folks engaged in it, right? You're not just talking about some government that abused some tool.
Shout out to the Reuters guys that did this investigation. Shout out to Tom Hagel. Shout out to all the guys who put together the technical background to solidify.
I'm amazed to see that it's come out, man. Like the amount of work people have put into Operation Hangover and everything before is one thing, but to see a Reuters story get taken down for the first time in I don't know however many decades over this Indian court injunction was deeply worrisome. I know the EFF and other folks like really kind of perked up the minute that you see these investigations being taken down, because I mean, in many ways, it's not just that it's some kind of like slap lawsuit, but it's the fact that what's being leveraged and abused here is the presence of any company in India to then use these very trumped up laws to be able to arm wrestle them into compliance. And that's far more concerning than whether you actually have a slap suit in the States, which is what we've seen with like Russian oligarchs and whatever, because at least the process is being held up to a more relatable standard, as opposed to some random judge in some random part of India who just decides over, a case like this on whatever terms they choose, using the leverage of the fact that like you probably have employees somewhere in New Delhi who are now subject to all kinds of draconian measures.
Probably going to have a long-term chilling effect as well on folks who don't want to deal with all this lawyer stuff, so they're just not going to go down that road. And especially in this area of research, it's always sensitive and kind of, I mean, you're doing this book on Hacker Team, right? This is a sensitive area of digging that.
Right.
When these court cases pop up, you expect this long tail. Anyway.
I'll put this. If you want to talk about a counterbalance to the chilling effect, if you want to open yourself up to discovery in a lawsuit, be my fucking guest. Part of what we're doing in the book that has been, and look, I keep saying we're doing this book. Lorenzo has been working his ass off. I am barely like crawling behind him. But like something Lorenzo has accomplished is to get access to court documents from when Vincenzetti, the CEO of Hacking Team, decided to go after some of the former employees, alleging that they were behind the Phineas Fisher hack, which is patently not true. But what it did provide us was thousands of pages worth of court discovery. So you go, cool. You want to arm wrestle some people and hope that you can just keep them quiet. That's great. Just remember that discovery cuts both ways, and we'll be more than happy to check that shit out when it comes out.
You're sounding like Apple's lawyers running from the NSO lawsuit.
Right, man. Well, the opposite.
Yeah.
Quickly. Let's get to the news. I just want to read the top 8 headlines on Security Week trending, just to give people a perspective of like what we know and how little we know. The top story is CISA warns of recent Microsoft SharePoint remote code execution flaw being exploited in attacks. Number 2, Fortinet confirms zero-day exploit targeting FortiManager systems. Number 3, Cisco patches a vulnerability exploited in a large-scale brute force campaign. Number 4, Samsung Galaxy S24 hacked at Pontoon, Ireland. Number 5, Cisco confirmed security incident after hacker offers to sell data. Number 6, new Fortinet zero-day exploited months before the patch was issued. Number 8, NVIDIA patches high-severity flaws in Windows and Linux graphics drivers. It's just a pouring, non-stop pouring. Now, if you keep in mind that this is just a tiny, tiny, tiny fraction of what we know, it suggests that we're all wasting our time. Like, what are we doing? What are we doing? I want to focus in on the Fortinet 0-day because this FortiManager thing is the top story this week. And Kevin Beaumont had a brand new piece today on. Costin, what stands out to me with this one is how little we know. Like, do you have a sense of what's happening here with this Fortinet? Who's behind it? Who the targets are? Like, what's really going on?
The first thing that strikes me in the list is there's a lot of Fortinet mentions in there. There's a lot of Cisco's. And remember what I said in the past when you were asking what are the cool guys using? I don't see any Proxmox in here. I don't see any pfSense. I'm just saying. And I don't think we're losing any kind of battles. We're just, maybe people are not using the right kind of things. But again, to be a bit more serious and speaking specifically about the FortiJump story, that's how Kevin likes to call it. I think this is quite interesting in the sense that you see that more and more of these appliances are actually built in such a way that they're quite easy to manage remotely, including servers. For instance, when you buy some high-end servers, they kind of come with a cloud subscription. So there's like a QR code that you can pull on a small card out of the server. And all you have to do is, just scan that QR code and you can remotely manage the server from anywhere in the world through the cloud. So we have something maybe in a way similar here with this FortiManager and Fortinet. It's essentially a protocol that allows you to manage your Fortinet appliances with FortiManager when they are not in the same place. So let's say one of them is behind the NAT, or both of them, both your manager software and the appliance itself, both of them are behind NAT. So then they can't maybe establish a direct connection. So you can't directly connect to them. So thankfully, there's a solution for that. The only problem is that this solution is getting abused. And once you connect an appliance to your FortiManager, or the other way around, once an appliance gets connected to your FortiManager, unfortunately, it seems there's no kind of, let's say, security or policies that prevent an appliance to join your FortiManager inventory. Once that happens, it's kind of game over. And from there, vulnerability can be exploited to get even more access further down, just to essentially pivot further down your infrastructure. And once you do that, it's basically game over.
Juan, why is it so difficult to do forensics on these types of attacks? I'll point out, Mandiant put out a report after helping Fortinet with the research. And they're basically saying we don't have more details on the threat actor exploiting this vulnerability. We've seen 50 potentially impacted victims. Google is notifying potentially impacted victims. We kind of suspect that they might be doing this. Like, why can't we even do forensics on this thing?
Well, I think you should ask Fortinet that, right? Like the problem here is that these companies that have been making these appliances have not prioritized inspectability in their development of them, and then there seems to be some way in which they've also gone into dissuading in certain periods. I'm not going to say it's Fortinet in particular, but this is what we've seen with Antiy, PulseSecure, all these different appliances, wherein it's your hardware, so you think you can essentially limit what people do with it, including being able to do proper incident response. And by that, I'm saying, like, if I need to engage the manufacturer in order to do incident response and follow whatever terms they might want, NDAs or whatever it is that they're asking for, there's something wrong with the device, right? Like, there's something completely wrong with the way it's been manufactured, because that's not how any of this shit should work.
Didn't Fortinet bring Mandiant in to do this research? I imagine all those friction points would be removed.
I don't know. Why would Fortinet bring Mandiant in to do it, as opposed to Mandiant discovering this and letting Fortinet know that? And I'm guessing. I don't know.
Yeah, we're all guessing. We don't fact check, and we might correct it down the road. But
what I'm saying is, like, is Fortinet discovering any of this? And I'll say that about Ivanti and PulseSecure, Barracuda, and so on. Like, are these people discovering any of these vulns themselves? It's the same thing as Apple, right? Like, when you you just have this waterfall of like external people telling you there's this wrong with your product that you didn't know about. And you go, thank you. It has been fixed. And you go, well, what else is wrong with your product? They go, nothing. There's absolutely nothing wrong with our product. And then somebody has to come back 2 months later and be like, there's this thing wrong with your product. And they go, thank you, it's fixed, right? Like it's this constant cycle, but it's living off of the information asymmetry of it's really hard to inspect these devices. Someone is going to find out that something is wrong by virtue of stumbling on a different part of an operation that includes a 0-day in these things. So you stumble on a C2 or you're investigating some other thing, you find some traffic in the middle of some other investigation, and then you realize that there's one of these shitty devices in the middle of it, including a 0-day. And you go, cool, let's let these guys know. But it's not driving any kind of change on their part.
That's frightening, though.
All they're doing is getting better at crisis PR. You don't actually see them going, look, we're realizing that the entire forest we've built is on fire. Here's a bunch of tools to try to help everybody investigate this shit. And then we're going to be working on revamping FortiOS and all of our product line over the next 2 years, but it's going to take some time. So here's a bunch of IR kits or whatever the hell people need. Like, we don't see that from any of the appliance vendors. It's just this constant, Apple-like desire to, plug the holes of the ship with your fingers and then pretend that you haven't been sinking for 6 years.
Just confirmation of how little we know. I'll read a line exactly from the Fortinet, word for word from the Fortinet advisory. At this stage, we have not received reports of any low-level system installations or malware or backdoors on these compromised systems. To the best of our knowledge, there have been no indicators of modified databases or connections and modifications. It's like, cool. Hey, all these bad things, we don't know. We have no idea if any of these bad things.
We have not been told of anything bad.
Correct. How do we fix this, Costin? Like, for instance, why hasn't there been a CSRB investigation of these vendors? Like, I feel like this is a daily occurrence. You look at the CISA known exploited vulnerabilities lists. It's once a week you get a Pulse Secure, a Fortinet, an Ivanti. There's always something popping up. Why aren't we prioritizing this? If it's, as we expect, it's under attack, ODs galore, nation state guys are playing there, like, why are we letting this world live?
I think we talked about this issue a lot of times, and the fact that vendors are typically downplaying the severity of pretty much all vulnerabilities because they care about the stock price. I thought it was an interesting story this week that the government has fined a couple of companies because of the SolarWinds hack. I don't know if we have time to actually
I don't know if you call those fines. It was like 990,000 fine against Checkpoint. It's like, come on, it's slap on the wrist, waste of everyone's time, waste of the ink.
There's okay, give me that money, and I can do a lot of things with them. So there were like some fines versus, again, no fines. Some fines, in my opinion, it means that the government at least is doing something, and the fact that they're thinking that there needs to be some kind of accountability, and there needs to be something, that needs to be done about downplaying vulnerabilities.
Like some SEC sanctions is like as the government doing something doesn't stand up to scrutiny at all.
Well,
I think they have maybe another 14 days to do things, and then other people will take over. I don't know.
God, no.
Stop.
We're like, everyone here is like, no. Don't break the illusion, man. Don't break the fifth barrier. We're pretending this shit's not coming. Look, the issue with fines, and maybe this isn't as obvious in a European context. Maybe not. I'm being, I don't want to oversimplify the European mind. I'm just saying, in America, being fined something small is almost incentivizing more of that behavior.
It's built into the business model.
You've basically said this is not like the worst possible thing that could happen. The government coming and trying to take your money has happened in such a manageable sum that fuck it. If that's the order of magnitude that we have set, like they're not going to show up saying it's $100 million fine. You go, oh my God, like we're ruined. If you show up with like 999,000 or whatever, you're like, cool. Like,
these guys must have amazing lobbyists, though, because they've avoided CSRB scrutiny. They've all signed the pledge and posed with Jenny Stilly at RSA behind a nice big screen. Like, no, this is real stuff. They've all taken the pledge and going out and saying, hey, we take secure by design, secure by default seriously. We're progressing in the right direction. The ODAs keep flowing. We're in this mess, and nobody's investigating it. It suggests that there's a very strong lobby there, or someone else just doesn't care. I don't know.
No, I'm not against the notion that there is a strong lobbying effort, but I don't know that it's their lobbying effort. Like the issue that you have here is a kind of implicit banding together of anti-tech regulation lobbying writ large. So it's not about these appliances in particular. It's the fact that like no tech company wants any regulation, period. And what this all gets caught up in is a broad effort to stave off any kind of regulation, because it's almost like breaking down this wall. Like right now, there's this perception that regulating the tech sector in any meaningful way could be a financially crippling thing to the U.S. economy, because you don't want to disincentivize innovation or whatever bullshit we're really caught up in. So it's almost like nobody wants to cross that Rubicon in any meaningful way at any portion of tech, whether it's AI or cybersecurity or software liability or whatever it is. So I think what is happening is you're getting this very strong lobbying in a very broad way. And it's also benefiting people like these appliance vendors who, just kind of get to look cozy next to Google and Microsoft and everybody else going, oh, no, leave us all alone. We're all fine. We don't need this. Like, you're going to really screw up the global economy if you guys do that. I don't think it's specific to this shit.
And buyers have nowhere to move to, right? Like, there are no new innovation coming up to replace any incumbents. So it's not like buyers will punish them.
I think the problem, I'm actually really disappointed in that side of things. I don't see any efforts coming up of people trying to create enterprise-grade hardware type stuff like what Kostin is describing.
The VCs haven't learned how to power it with AI yet.
I think that I wonder to what extent the VCs want to get involved with anything hardware manufacturing whatsoever. So
I say that. I bring up this because CISA is making a big effort around, hey, use your pocketbooks to force them to be secure by design, secure by default. If you're using Fortinet, where do you go? You go to Ivanti? Like, where do you go?
Yeah, I think that's the problem, right? You have these very big companies, but also I would want to ask some of our VC friends how how the VC space looks at this, but how much hardware investment do we see at all? Right, like if we decided tomorrow we're going to make a bunch of Proxmox appliances that are meant for inspectability, verifiability, and like we're going to go and try to steal the lunches of these companies that have massive sales teams, have already been through FedRAMP, they have SOC 2 compliance, blah, 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 and we're going to go try to outsell them, like you actually do need a great deal of infrastructure and sort of business infrastructure to mount a hardware anything company these days, especially if you want to sell to enterprise. So it is actually a really difficult space to break into. It's not to say that it can't be done. From the sounds of it, there's enough open source and open hardware shit to go mount a very viable alternative to this stuff. But I wonder, when you say voting with your pocketbooks, I wonder to what extent we would even be able to raise funds right now if we went to any of these VCs and said, look, these guys are fucking up. We're going to go steal their lunch. We can make an appliance for, that sells for $80,000 and it's still cheaper than whatever the hell Ivanti was selling. And it's only going to cost us $30,000, but we need to, build the capability. We need to build the software. We need to create a sales team. We need to get all the regulatory, like all the compliance checks and whatnot that allow us to compete with these people. So it's going to take us like 2 to 3 years. You guys in? I have a feeling that most VCs are going to be like, nah, come back to us when you're already, kind of along the way. Right?
But the VCs are excited about funding the inspectability companies, the companies providing some level of inspectability of this software. I mean, we've seen examples of small companies that are early stage startups that are in this inspectability verification space. So I think that's where they're leaning. That's where they see value and money beyond trying to build these appliances and get into the hardware business.
But it's not an alternative.
It's not an alternative.
It's not an alternative. We're not incentivizing the super high end, super inspectables, pro security hardware company that we will be buying from, for as long as we can before Cisco buys it and kills it. The issue there is you have these. Again, it's easier to fund software. It's easier to fund these sort of recurring revenue models. You want something inspectable. And I think that's cool. I mean, look at things like Binarly, which we're both very big fans of, and we're both advisors in. But you look at something like Binarly, and what Binarly does is it'll enable people to know what's wrong with their software, with their firmware, in an automated fashion, where there's regressions, where there's issues. Like the whole promise of SBOM is there. But let's be honest here. That is enough knowledge to go back to your vendors and to go back to the government and say, what the hell, guys? Like, this thing is super fucked up. The software's super old. There's all kinds of vulns. We've let them know 6 months ago. And you go, yeah, okay, vote with your pocketbook. You go, well, we still don't have an alternative, right? So I think that's the problem, is at some point you do need somebody to come and sell something different. And I've been thinking about this a lot. Like, it makes me wonder if the larger issue here is one of needing to fund a large open source software platform effort more than a replacement hardware effort. Like OpenWRT and all these sort of like Ubiquity type projects. And I mean, even look at something like Android, right? You lower the cost of entry by virtue of making the software, which is this like semi-universally compatible software, freely available. And then everybody can go and flash that onto whatever hardware they want. Like I'm curious to what extent someone would be able to do more in this appliance space by decoupling the software into something inspectable, maintainable, desirable that can be deployed on different types of appliances. If that's even possible, I might be reducing this very complex problem into something overtly simple. But I think that might be a way to kind of affect the space that'll be more effective than sitting around hoping somebody who knows how to build appliances, knows how to sell appliances, knows how to get appliances, verified, regulated, and scored, will somehow show up with a magical solution that enables everything security people want at this time.
Costin, you have a free idea for any of the VCs out there?
Sure. Look into what I was saying, pfSense. pfSense, this kind of class of products.
Can I just put a bow on this entire story, just come back to the Fortinet thing? Costin, is this definitely nation state? Do we know who it is? Are there IOCs? What is the state of play with what we know so far?
So I've seen a couple of IP addresses, 4 of them. One of them has previously been involved in a lot of bad activity, including fingerprinting. I think I've seen one of them used to have a Cobalt Strike server on it as well. So there isn't, let's say, much besides these IP addresses and the number of file names, indicators, and the number of log entries that you should be essentially be aware of. Nothing about attribution so far. Mandiant calls them UNC, so there isn't much in the sense of attribution at the moment.
What does your attribution engine tell you?
My attribution engine says something towards China, maybe.
Yeah.
But you ask me why? Because generally they're typically the masters at these kind of things. And
so you don't think this is ransomware? You think this is nation state?
I don't think I've seen any signs. Typically you would see the signs of ransomware being deployed, right? Of course, in the past we've seen ransomware groups heavily exploiting this, but mostly not 0 days. When it comes to 0 days of this nature, I think we've seen not ransomware groups, but APT groups, Chinese APT groups in the past. But also, I think APT 29 was also quite adept at hacking this kind of network appliances.
We've been seeing tons of Russian and Chinese, and much more so Chinese than Russian, but plenty of Russian and Chinese. So, like, if at the risk of sounding truly like dumb, I tend to assume these things are Chinese until I hear otherwise, which is it's not a good way to do threat intel, but
I don't think it helps. I mean, it doesn't really help, but at least, it gives us an idea if you want to look for connections or attribution, like it's a direction that you can dig further if you want.
I'm going to use the same story to pivot quickly on this notion of verifiability and inspectability and the ability to know what's happening on these devices. Apple yesterday just announced that their new private cloud compute thing is now open for inspectability. They released some toolkits on a virtual research environment, helping, enabling people to perform their own security analysis of this private cloud compute. I'll remind people, private cloud compute is built into this Apple intelligence coming to the newfangled iPhones. And this is the technology that handles the handoff when the computation, the AI computation isn't on device and they have to go to the cloud for more powerful models. This is that system that they're doing the handoff. And they're basically saying, hey, here's some toolkits. Here's our virtual research lab that you guys can go play to verify and validate the security and privacy promises and claims that we're making. This should be exciting. I mean, we just talked about the absence of it on those appliances. In this world, how do you rate? Are we giving Apple some kudos here for this? How are we viewing this?
I want to like it.
This is what we've been asking for, though.
It sort of, yes. So look, this is where your reputation bites you in the ass. I want to like it because I think it's the right thing to do, because it's better than anything that we're seeing from other AI hyped up places. The only thing that I'll say is I want to wait to try it because similar programs from Apple in the past have ended up being, not going to say a bit of a sham, but like you can get your
SRD program, the security research device program, for instance. It's modded iPhones that they ship.
iPhone device.
Do you know anyone that's received one?
I don't know
anyone that's ever gotten one.
I don't know anyone that has one. Similarly with like the Apple bug bounty shit, I don't know anyone that's been paid for it myself. I know a lot of people who've reported things and never got paid. So like things like that make it so you look at something like this, which is, again, the right thing to do and a really cool effort. And it's in line with what Apple has been saying about AI, which frankly, between that and that paper I sent you guys privately about like Apple trying to make a logical argument for hyping down this bullshit about LLMs thinking. Things like that make me feel like Apple is being the adult in the room, and I fucking love it. I think it's great. However, I need to see that they're actually doing what they say they're doing, because they haven't in the past. And that's, it's kind of a shitty thing. But again, this is why you don't fuck with your reputation in research circles, because we have long memories and it's a small fucking space.
I'll remind you guys that the only documented activity of APT using AI on devices to help with data exfiltration is Triangulation doing it on Apple devices with Spotlight. Custom with this PCC inspectability, do you plan to play with it? Do you plan to get in this lab, play with it? And do you see this helping security research? Like, what are you excited about to look at here?
I don't think I can play with it because I don't have a new Mac that I could use to play with it. Unfortunately, I have only very, very old Macs
It's Apple Silicon only, right?
I think so.
It's you also, I mean, it's Apple, but mostly because you need like the neural engine stuff. And
so my Macs are like 10 years old.
Jesus, man.
I definitely need an upgrade. I need an upgrade, guys, for sure.
All right. What intelligence agency that's listening would like to certify pre-own a M3 MacBook for Ghost?
Buried in this story about inspectability, Apple is actually upping the bug bounties on bypasses, this PCC, any sort of bypass of this from $50,000 to $1 million, which are big bounties. I mean, you know how many MacBooks you can buy without costing? So I suggest we get to work there.
I also wanted to mention that I did apply for a researcher's device in the past, and I was not eligible because, Romania. But I applied again this time. You told me to apply. I applied, and this time it worked. We'll see. I don't think that I reached the threshold because I only have like a very small number of 0 days ever discovered, and they were all on Windows, not on Mac. So.
And you think there's some geo involved in it? And I'll use this to kind of pivot quickly to this story that's happening in Linux. I mean, Linux basically kicked out a bunch of driver maintainers because they're Russians. I mean, the balkanization of tech is actually here. We've been talking about what it might look like. Well, this is what it looks like. And we saw Linus basically say, F you. Like, there are sanctions. These people are Russians. Stop bothering me with why we're doing it.
You said I'm finished.
Is there any sort of nervousness about that we've basically separated by geo?
It's a big story, if you ask me.
Tell me why it's a big story to you.
Yeah, go for it. Yeah, tell
us. I think it's a big story because, first of all, initially this was kind of, more or less silent. It wasn't clear the reason. Okay, people said, okay, so they seem Russian or they have Russian email addresses, but there was like no official announcement that we are booting all the Russian developers from the kernel sources. But then later, Linus, he got probably a bit emotional, so he started doing what he does best, the finger cursing and so on. And he said, like, if you're not familiar, just read about sanctions, like learn what this word actually means and learn about lawyers. And to me, it sounds like the lawyers are making the decision. We talked in the past about the lawyers.
Map conversation we had in the last episode, right? Where the lawyers are deciding regardless of what happens.
Bernardo said, like, no episode without talking about Virus Total. It seems
There's
that
no threat intel without talking about Virus.
Shout out to Bernardo for listening, man. He listens to all the episode. Now we're up to 28 listeners.
He's the 28th listener. No, look, man. There's no threat intel without VT, right? So let's say that shit the way it is, man.
No business without lawyers. So he was saying, yeah, we have to comply with sanctions. But I think the important part here is which sanctions. And it's very easy to say that, yeah, we're going to do that because of sanctions without specifically saying which one. And I think here everyone is just super cautious. Like, people are super cautious. We don't know for sure which, but because in general, Russia is bad and there's a lot of sanctioned people in Russia, there's no way of knowing. Maybe some of these guys work with the military or they work with the government, whatever, and we don't want to get in trouble. And the easiest thing to do is just boot them. And because of the laws and regulations in that part of the world, the government could force them any very moment to put some kind of a backdoor in the kernel source.
So we're going to boot the Chinese as well from the Linux kernel.
I think that's the best part, because now people are saying that, listen, the Huawei developers, they are doing hundreds of very high profile patches in the kernel, but they haven't been booted from the kernel yet. So, and Huawei is sanctioned, correct? It's a sanctioned company.
Wow.
So, yeah,
I want to throw in 2 lines. Yeah. 2 lines from the original announcement is that they've been removed due to various compliance requirements, and they can come back in the future if sufficient documentation is provided. I'd also remind folks that the drivers remain in the kernel, like the actual drivers that they were maintaining. It's just the guys got cut out. Very strange, odd.
This is, I think
scenario.
it's more of a symbolic gesture, along the lines of, the big personalities that are involved in maintaining this. But I actually think of it as an interesting admission of the failure of open source when it comes to security. And that's not a very popular view, but I've always been I've always been very skeptical of this sort of myth that open source means that something is more secure. There are more eyes on it that are making it more secure. I actually think that from a sociological perspective, it's actually quite the opposite. What you get is a diffusion of responsibility and a lack of ownership. It's this thinking somebody else must have surely looked at this, which I have no reason to believe that's actually the case. And you also have this notion of, well, it's free, so lower your expectations. If you wanted some support, if you wanted a certain level of, uptime and whatnot, go buy an enterprise solution. You go, those are very convenient answers. And yes, I appreciate it that you're doing this on your off time. However, to then say, well, anything open source is more secure, I don't think that thing follows. And the reason I'm putting it that way is not to launch into some kind of ideological tirade against open source, but rather there is an implicit admission. If the maintainers of the Linux kernel itself have to say, we're not going to allow these untrusted sources to just throw, because they could add whatever they want in there, and you go, well, so who's reading over, like, if you guys don't feel comfortable with whatever process there is for submitting code to the Linux kernel itself, then what part of Linux is supposed to be heavily inspected and carefully considered? And there's no way you could be hiding X, Y, and Z in this thing. Like, it just, those are not, they're counterintuitive notions.
And how are you picking these people to kick out? Just based on .ru addresses, or some team sits there and say, oh, that guy.
Man, like, the idea that Huawei is a sanctioned company and is actively providing, it's like it's clearly a double standard. I'm not standing up for the Russians here. I'm just saying, this all sounds like this kind of like rah, big personas with big feelings type of decision making, and not some kind of strategic decisions. Moreover, I don't even know what lawyers are even involved in the middle of any of this shit. Like that, it's just,
Kostin, we're mentioning Huawei, but you have to imagine there's a ton of other companies in this kind of sensitive space that have thrown developers at the Linux kernel and participating in there so deeply that it's impossible to kick them out, right? That has to be a part of corporate strategy.
The Gia Tan company out of, Dubai or whatever.
And I think about it the other way around. When is Russia going to ban Linux? Because too many of the developers are from the United States. Like, this can go both ways, and I would be very curious to see. They banned iPhones for what? For government procurement, correct? And I think we were discussing this story recently, where it said that actually they banned iPhones in the government in March 2023, which was, to me, super interesting because it predates the announcement of triangulation, was June 1st, which somehow suggested that the Russian government was aware of the story 3 months before the announcement. So quite interesting. But going to the same line of thinking, this can probably get bigger and bigger, and I'm very curious to see if the Russian government will ban the Linux kernel, because it's mostly developers from the United States.
And move on to what? Right? Like, what version of FortiManager? Like, is there some FortiManager based OS that you could just move on to?
There might be some operating systems developed in Russia. I don't know.
I think Kostin knows more than he's talking.
Kostin always knows more than he's talking about.
We're an hour in, and I want to get.
I will not do like free promotion unless we have like some paid advertisements.
You know
what I'm talking about.
We're an hour in, and I want to get to this story, which is the magic money disappearing on a daily, weekly basis. Cryptocurrency heists seems to be like all the rage these days. We saw an announcement yesterday. The U.S. government owned crypto. There was 20 million in crypto that was kind of seized in certain things, is on the move and being washed. Radiant Capital announced they've lost 50 million in an advanced malware attack against hardware wallets.
Oh, was that
Kaspersky had a pretty solid Lazarus report on Lazarus creating a game and exploiting Chrome 0-day to do some crypto heists and so on. Kostin, like, this world seems to be where the real security research is happening. This is the real bug bounty, right? Like, if you think about it, this is the real bug bounty, because when you find a bug and you exploit it, it's real money. It's real magic money.
I think it was Mikko Hipponen was saying that all cryptocurrencies have a bug bounty system built in from default, from scratch, by default. Yeah.
What do you make of all?
Absolutely. Like, I think I've said this before. Again, I don't want to hype it or to make it sound like they're awesome or anything, but it is indeed quite impressive. Probably the time, the resources they are investing in this field, and the kind of attacks they're running, cryptocurrency attacks, they're pretty impressive. And there's no doubt that what is collectively known as Lazarus has become like the top player in the field of cryptocurrency attacks. Now, the US government has been owned before. I think they lost money in the past through some really simple attacks. For instance, you send like a small amounts of money to someone just to detail how the attack works. And when they have to send some money, let's say to move the money to another wallet, they just rely on the history just to say where the money last came from. And they accidentally send the money to one of these addresses, which sometimes they happen to have the first characters and the last characters. They're the same as your own wallet. So they do this kind of attacks in which they build wallets that the addresses look very similar to your own. So again, the U.S. government has been owned before. I don't know if they've been really owned for $20 million. Like losing that kind of money is a bit shocking. I wonder who's responsible for it, who will pay for it. Now, with the Radiant Capital, I think the attack was interesting in the sense that the developers, they did have hardware wallets. However, the malware they're talking about, was it advanced enough to essentially intercept the request to the hardware wallet and make it look like you're signing transactions for something else. So I think that the sophistication of the attacks in this field is increasing, and the ingenuity of these attacks is increasing, which is pretty interesting for me.
Big money, though. I mean, it's not only the North Koreans. I mean, Andy Greenberg had a story up on this Zach XBT that's on Twitter doing these chase down investigations. There's a recent case, $263 million stolen by a group of teenagers that were just going to nightclubs and sharing this magic money around. It's fascinating how much crime is riddled in that ecosystem outside of the nation state and the North Koreans using it to whatever they're using it for.
You know what I'm really curious about is what the attrition is to those funds as you have to swish them around and try to turn them into real money. Like the issue with the magic money,
it costs to wash it, right? It's significant.
It costs, and then also like how much money. What does the financial fabric between magic money in all of its forms and real money? What's the bandwidth of that at any given moment? Like that's always been my curiosity, and just not having a sense of what the macroeconomics of magic money look like. Of okay, let's say the three of us become a ransomware group, and like we just hold some folks hostage, and we end up getting $30 million of Bitcoin or Ethereum or whatever, and the three of us are sitting here going, guys, we're rich. Okay, how do we turn this money into real world utility?
Get Coast in a MacBook.
Right. How do we get Coast in a MacBook? Like, and like that one's easy because you could probably go and whatever bullshit Silk Road like equivalent sells probably a bunch of stolen goods and go, hey, let's get Coast in a MacBook. Cool. And then you go, okay, we have $29,990,000 in Bitcoin. What do we do? Right. Like I'm not saying that it's impossible to cash out. I'm saying that there's these big numbers, and particularly in economies that have a clear incentive to emphasize their value beyond all things. I would love some insight, some glimpse of what those numbers look like by the time you're able to get your money out. And look, man, if we go from having no money to having 30 million magic money, and tomorrow we walk away with 5 million real money, that's still a lot of money. It's still, I'm not saying that there's no value in crime. I'm saying that whenever I read headlines like this, there's like 3 asterisks next to that number in my head where I'm like, yeah, and look, you lost 30 million. I get that loss is real, but it doesn't necessarily mean the attackers got 30 million. And
but
I'm
the ecosystem got it too, because if you're paying these fees to all these Tornado Cash or whatever it's called that does the cleanup, right? I mean, you're paying the fees. The money is still being distributed, even
look, I'm saying I'm not saying that it. Like I said, you lose the full amount. The attackers gain some portion of that amount. And you're right that the rest of the ecosystem continues to feed. And that's why the house is always winning regardless, right? Like the house will continue to win. The whole ecosystem of tumblers and cleaners and people that are willing to do whatever. And look at what we just said, right? Like Kosten's stolen MacBook. There's a reason there's a market for all this shit that just gets picked up. Whether they steal your iPhone or they hold up an Apple truck and get a bunch of, like, how else do you sell those machines?
Kosten, it's also clear that none of this stuff is anonymous. It's all traceable. Or is there an end point where it becomes untraceable? And is there like a time to cash out? Like, help me understand how this portion that Juan is talking about, how it happens and where does traceability ends? Because the Zach XBT guy is able to look at where the wallets are moving the money and how much is going to whom and all of this stuff. It just seems like there is no anonymity there, that it's...
I think there's some very good platforms which allow for the forensic investigation of these transactions. Now, from what I have seen, so we have to consider one thing, by the way, which is the main question that was, how do they actually bring the money out of the magic money? And I think in the past, the US government sanctioned a lot of cryptocurrency exchanges that were used mostly by cyber criminals. And then they moved on and they started hitting on Binance. So Binance was probably like one of the big warning lights out there because of the volume that they were actually trading. The volume was huge. So CJ, like the CEO of Binance, he went to prison actually in the United States. He may have been released recently or is about to get released for not being compliant, again, with all these sanctions and customer checks and know your customers.
KYC,
Correct.
anti-money laundering rules, right?
But the chain, if you want, it looked very simple. It looked like that, like you steal the magic money, then you wash them through a number of measures, then they end up in one of these exchanges, and from those exchanges, they go through the conventional means to casinos, gambling sites, and from there, eventually they end up in our pockets, like the Hobbits likes to say.
Is it traceable from end to end?
So what I see is that this trace is getting more and more sophisticated. So jumping between different chains is one of the things that I see more and more often. So like the Bitcoins become Ethereum, and the Ethereum then it goes into L2, which is different other currencies built on top of Ethereum, and from there it jump to another chain like Solana, and it hops across different chains, and this makes it incredibly difficult to trace. Like, let's say the rookie criminals would just, like you're saying, use something like Tornado on top of Ethereum, right? Just to mix the money, they put it in the same pool, like you put something and then everybody takes back a bit. But that's like easily traceable if you want. Same with Monero. But like the really advanced cyber criminals, they cross-jump the chains from one to another many, many times until they get lost. And I think, Zach is pretty good at tracking this. And even he says, like, from there they jump to this, and from there they jump to that. And eventually, they jump to something else. But like, you don't know what happened further down the pipe.
And the North Koreans are doing the same, obviously, to make it actual money. Or how are they converting this millions and millions and millions?
Through the casinos, right? Through the gambling casinos in Hong Kong. And you have to keep in mind that the North Koreans were pretty good even in the old times with the real SWIFT money, correct? When they were stealing SWIFT money and they were just laundering all that. They were still laundering everything
North
through
Koreans
casinos.
Were trading in meth and like super notes, and like a lot of counterfeit real money. Like they've been pulling that's the other part of this, right? Criminal ecosystems are valuable to criminals in a variety of ways, and that's because like part of that long chain of us trying to launder our 30 million in Bitcoin can very well be, we're going to get 25 million equivalent in cocaine, and then we're going to go sell it, right? Like you have all these different ways that criminal ecosystems essentially tie into one another. So like the Macau houses, like the casinos in Macau were a part of, if I remember correctly, some of the discussions around the Bangladesh hack. Like where did this money end up? I think, who was it? It was that Booz Allen sub company had a report. I can't remember.
Fantastic report.
Yeah, it was a really good report about how some of this money had been laundered. So, it's all these criminal ecosystems are going to tie back to each other in some way. And what I've always been curious about is if you had a real sense of the magic money macroeconomy, I would love to know how much of it was internal services that ended up taking whatever equity and value, how much of it was ultimately just used for crime. Because even when we talk about now like DeFi platforms and all these like bridges between currencies, like some people hypothetically really wanted that in the magic money fandom. But for the most part, like it seems to have the most value in just obfuscating transactions. And you go, how much of that was what accounted for the value of one of these companies that just do DeFi versus the legitimate use cases of it? Like if real money's main purpose was fueling crime and then only like 30% was about enabling our lives, we would have a very different perception of it.
Right. Kostin, you got a chance to look at the Kaspersky report on the Stank game? I mean, it was documented by Microsoft previously, but I think the news here is that Microsoft missed the Chrome O-Day, right? The Microsoft researchers missed the Chrome O-Day, and that's being exploited through this detankzone.com game website that they'd created their own game. Pretty fascinating story and pretty good research. What stood out for you in this story? Including for me, the fact that they caught it on a person living in Russia, which is pretty interesting as well.
I think, again, there's some really super good researchers in there, and of course, Boris Larin, that we know very well. We worked together in the past on several big announcements. So he's definitely one of the top guys. If you look at his security reports for Microsoft products, even for Apple, obviously, he's like way up there. What really stood up for me, I think that exactly what I was saying before, that the Lazarus guys, they are incredibly creative, and the fact that in the past we've seen them create all sorts of trading software that was poisoned with malware, like even hacking into companies and trojanizing their software. But I think that they are doing a lot more than probably what is visible. So even this 0 day, this case, is probably just a small fraction of all the other things they're doing. And to me, this is dangerous in the sense that I like that they were targeting cryptocurrency enthusiasts, and I'm happy they're not targeting you, Juan, or me, or our friends. So, please do that because, this level of creativity, when refocused in another direction, it could be very worrying.
And the last story I want to get to before we got to shut it down is Antiy. Antiy, Antiy, is this Chinese anti-malware company that has been involved in some of the reporting on Western nation-state type attacks. They're upset with your boy, Juan. They're upset with Dakota Carey from Sentinel One over his criticisms of their work.
Yeah.
They put out a long report fight against the bald eagle in the fog relaying cooperation and reads very Chinese. Catch us up on what's going on here.
It's actually really funny.
What are they responding to?
So they're responding essentially to a series of, to a report by Dakota Carey, my boy, as you mentioned him, who is an absolute G when it comes to a lot of sort of...
Stay close to that mic.
A lot of what's happening with sort of these Chinese researchers, and something that he was discussing was sort of the propaganda value and coordination that seems to be occurring when it comes to Chinese reports on, let's say, US APTs, Western activity, and so on, where he points, he's just pointing out that there's a certain amount of coordination, there's a certain amount of ignoring certain topics, right? Like the same way that we we give a lot of the U.S. threat intel producers a hard time because they don't cover any Western APTs. I mean, Chinese reports just pretend that like Chinese espionage in its whole scale not only doesn't exist, but then they'll do certain releases that don't make a whole lot of sense except for their propaganda value. And that's just
which makes sense.
Yeah,
because isn't that the motive?
It makes a lot of sense. Though I will say I don't want to paint them all with too broad a brush. Like the Antiy report against Dakota's work is actually really interesting because it seems like they're really upset at this notion that we're saying that Chinese researchers have not contributed anything net new or meaningful when it comes to investigating Western APTs. And I don't think that's true. I don't think any of us would say that. Chinese researchers have contributed at a lot of steps, particularly when you look back at stuff like Stuxnet, Dooku, Gauss era. Like, they did contribute, sure. No one is saying that they don't have talent. No one is saying that they don't provide net new things. What we are saying is that the releases are bizarre, that they don't really follow a lot of the standard of what we've come to expect of APT reports from other places. And the points that they try to make are really heavily reliant on a lot of leaked materials from, let's say like the Shadow Broker stuff, the Snowden documents, etc. Or they point to stuff produced by other companies like Kaspersky and whatnot. But they don't have that same level of rigor, or even, it's strange, right? Like, you're getting reports in the past 3-4 years about Western activity from 8 or 10 years ago. And
is it because they're not writing it for you though, that it seems bizarre to you?
Well, they're writing them in English, so let's I don't know who they're writing them for. But and like I said, I don't want to paint it with too broad a brush because, for example, you'll look at something like Red Drip team was putting stuff out about the Lamberts, and there's been like Antiy at one point put out a report about some equation stuff in Solaris and so on. So like, they have provided net new things. They have found things. What we're saying is that the timing, the manner, the tone, and the focus of those reports is strange. It's outdated. It's not net new enough to sometimes justify some of the length and size of publications. And then you have some companies like Kihu where what they're putting out is basically a political statement. Like, there isn't even anything technical to it. They're just bitching about the scale of the US cyber devil, right? And you're like, cool. Now, what's really bizarre about this report, and the reason I really wanted to touch upon it, is they very expressly call out Sentinel One's arrogance. They talk about they're talking about Dakota on a very personal level in some ways, and they refer to Sentinel One as my beloved day job as a revolving door for the U.S. government, which I thought was very interesting. Particularly me sitting here, I'm like, okay. But what kills me is they make their argument by pointing almost entirely at research from the Stuxnet Flame Gauss era of things, which they seem to be misattributing in bulk to the U.S., which, when you're arguing that what you provide is this great attributory value and understanding of the great Western machinery, and you can't tell APTs apart that are not all U.S., they're just kind of maybe vaguely Western flavored, it doesn't really make your argument. It makes it even worse when you're saying that Dakota is not giving these Chinese researchers their due, and then you ignore my work with Silas Cutler about, the things we contributed, like the discovery of StuxShop, the discovery of Flame 2.0.
StuxShop or Flower Shop?
Well, that's the thing. We found that Flower Shop is a component. Like, there was code reuse between the Flower Shop platform and early portions of Stuxnet. And that's a net new thing that Silas and I discovered and released when we were at Chronicle. What's funny is that report claims that Chinese researchers discovered that and points to like something from 6 months later, even though what Dakota pointed out was in their official timeline from Antiy, they do mention our research from Chronicle. Like, it's just, I understand the argument they're trying to make and that they feel insulted that we're saying that Chinese researchers aren't contributing on the threat intel space. But the way that they've made it is the worst possible. Like, it's so, it weakens everything you're trying to say when you subsequently focus entirely on outdated stuff, report on things from the Snowden documents, including the code names, forget Western researcher contributions, claim them as your own, and then like get super personal about Sentinel One as a company and Dakota as a researcher for having called you out on it. Once again, you're like, this is a bizarre report taking things on in a very bizarre way, right?
Costin, in the last episode, you talked about the Volt Typhoon attribution touching a nerve. Something touched a nerve here with these guys.
Oh, yeah.
Two things. One, I didn't read the report. I tried to read it. I got to a third through it, and I couldn't understand what it was trying to say. And I didn't have time to put it through an LLM. Did you read the report, and could you put a bow on the episode? Like, what does it mean? Is there any significance to it? Should we pay attention to what Antiy is doing?
I did read the report, and the first thing which attracted my attention was this new definition they introduced, which was A2PT, which in their words, it was like there's APTs and then there's advanced APTs, which is essentially advanced PTs.
But there is, though. You have to admit that that's accurate.
Which, like, true. Like, what did you call them, Juan, in the past? Super threat actors, right?
I mean, that was very specifically referring to collaboration platforms between multiple APTs.
Hypercloud. Hyper
PTs. Hype PTs. If you, for short, we can call them hype PTs.
Hype PTs. I saw, reading throughout the report, it seemed that it was kind of written in anger. That's how it felt. That's how it read.
Yeah.
It was kind of emotional as opposed to, a cold report of pure technical facts and more IOCs. There were like some really weird graphics in there, especially there's a graphic at the end that kind of blew my mind. And I was thinking that, when I grow up, I want to learn how to make graphics like that. And I think there's like some crazy points in that graphic, like some secret security organization or like a secret security vendor or something like that. Exactly as Juan, I thought that nobody is actually questioning the quality of some of the technical reports. But it seems to me it could be like a language barrier. I'm not sure, but it seems that they are like missing the whole point of the discussion. And the point was that there's a bunch of Chinese vendors that are actually involved in propaganda. That's the word. They are publishing propaganda materials in order to counteract the messaging from the West, which is that China is doing a lot of bad things. So they feel kind of responsible to publish that. How aboutism with the U.S. government?
We want them to publish, though. We don't want them to go dark. We want them to publish. We want to see their thinking. We want to see their, like, what are we encouraging them not to?
No. Sorry, Kosin.
I got to wrap up the episode because we got to leave in a few minutes.
You're not allowed to just cut this in the middle of the... No.
I can hear your phone. Like, this time it's not me. I swear to God that my phone is in airplane mode, so it's not me.
Mine is on Do Not Disturb, so it's
Gabe's phone. It's a Chinese spy phone embedded in one's microphone.
So, look, man, we're not telling them not to publish, but I think... In a very telling way, a lot of that report keeps saying, we do all this great stuff. Just look at what Kaspersky does. And you go, yeah, but you're not Kaspersky, right? Like, you're not publishing what Kaspersky's publishing. And I think I'm glad Kosin called it out the way that it is of like, your companies are contributing to propaganda efforts, which is very different to saying, you are publishing technical stuff that is in line with your propaganda or with your government's propaganda, which they seem to accuse us of doing. There's this notion that all threat intel is sort of like the contributing to sort of like U.S. propaganda efforts, and some of those graphics, like they're really big on like these connection like line charts, like Pepe Silva style, like bunch of boxes and connections. But the funny thing is, they make some claims in there that are complete like mirror fallacy shit, like saying that like the connection between U.S. bug bounties and the and the Equation Group like vulnerability side of things. You go, whoa, like. If you're telling me, like, you want to say that Pwn to Own is contributing to like U.S. government ops, like that's a pretty big claim, man. Come out with your report. I think we'll all be super fucking interested to read it. But you're just saying that we're doing the same thing you're doing, and we can actually show that you're doing it, and you can't show that we are.
Yeah, but in fairness, Microsoft just issued a digital defense report that only points out that no APTs exist in the West or Israel. Right. There's no IOCs. There's just, and it's the same thing. You look at this Microsoft Digital Defense Report, and you don't get a sense of what the landscape is because they've cut half of the landscape and thrown it in the dark. I mean, if the Chinese are doing, if we're doing it, the Chinese are doing it. It just feels like there is no genuine attempt.
We're not doing it the same way, but I get the point. Like
Thank you.
And this is the same issue that we were discussing last episode with like Michael Hayden and like Chinese espionage versus American espionage. If you squint your eye and tilt your head, you can say that it all looks the same. And yes, there are things that are like, let's just have a very nuanced discussion about it. Like, it bothers the absolute shit out of me that Western threat intel producers think it's okay to just ignore any Western activity. It does. It bothers me. I have published on it. That's what's pissing me off about this Antiy thing. It's like, I get the argument you're trying to make. Don't make it by doing exactly what you say we're doing.
All big vendors do exactly the same thing. That's the thing that annoys me. It's like Microsoft has a position on a perch to do better. Yeah. And putting out threat intel reports that calls attention to 4 threat actors is nonsense. I mean,
well, there you go. I mean, talk to Microsoft, man. I don't know what you want from me.
We'll get to this. We'll get to this and continue the conversation next week. There's a bunch of things we didn't get to. I have to run to the airport to get a flight. We're an hour and 26 minutes in, which I think hits the sweet spot for these guys who are driving and listening. Juanito, thank you very much. Thank you for waking up and doing this. Costin, enjoy your vacation again.
Thank you.
Safe travel.
More vacation.
Next week. Hopefully we get nominated for an award one day.
And not pulled down by the Appin lawyers.
By the Appin people.
Bye, guys.
Bye.
Bye.